This video is sponsored by Ground News.
The complete collapse of American public health can be said to have started on August 16, 2024, when conservative commentator Tucker Carlson formally introduced wellness influencers Casey and Calley Means to American right-wing audiences.
There's a huge problem in how we're practicing medicine right now.
It is classist and racist to suggest that mothers shouldn't be poisoning their kids.
The system is rigged against the American patient to create diseases and then profit off of them.
We have a medical crisis right now.
I think it is deeply a spiritual crisis.
Our food now is a science experiment.
I love cheese, for example.
Why is our health getting destroyed the more that we spend?
Our trusted institutions that you are a horrible parent if you even ask a question about 72 shots to your kids.
The interrelationship between Nazi Germany and what's being sprayed on every piece of food in the United States.
We need actually a new paradigm of how we view chronic disease.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
But they're far more than just wellness influencers. RFK Jr. recently brought on Calley to work as a special government employee for the Department of Health and Human Services. His sister, Casey, is now Trump's nominee for Surgeon General, which positions her to be the most powerful voice in public health. Behind the scenes, they're the architects of RFK Jr. and Trump's Make America Healthy Again movement, also known as MAHA. And it seems like almost no one knows who they are. MAHA has courted some of today's most influential right-wing voices and wellness industry heads: Jordan Peterson, Vani Hari, Mark Hyman, Dr. Oz, Russell Brand. Together, they want to start a revolution in public health. It feels easy to write Calley and Casey off as another phase in a long history of conspiratorial right-wing fear of big gay chemicals.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
But Calley and Casey also have real things to say about the American healthcare system.
Patients in America are getting much sicker every year, more depressed, in a country that's spending almost 2x more than any other country in the world.
But the problem is that it's enshrined that there's profit when people are sick.
But the system is rigged against the American patient to create diseases and then profit off of them.
They've disguised their grift under the language of a completely reasonable criticism of a failing system. So while, yeah, I agree the American healthcare system is notoriously one of the worst things, it is at least a healthcare system. But Calley and Casey want to use MAHA to completely tear this system apart. They want to leave the tens of millions of people who rely on state health plans like Medicaid and Medicare destitute. They want to slash the regulatory bodies that manage food safety standards and completely privatize the system in a way that, oh, what a coincidence, just so happens to benefit them. So how did this happen? Our story starts with Calley and Casey's appearance on Tucker Carlson's show in the summer of 2024. They claim to have special insider knowledge of the corruption boiling inside of American healthcare. They're framed as whistleblowers, truth-sayers, censored radicals standing up to an impossibly large system.
They will censor this. They will demonetize this video.
Calley is a former food industry lobbyist who represented clients in big food and pharma. Casey graduated from Stanford Medical School and left the medical profession only 1 year before completing her residency. Their background sets them up for a good story. Two former insiders promising to expose the corruption at the heart of American public health. Wow, amazing. And they look like a couple of nice-smelling siblings. Surely they're trustworthy, right? On the other hand, isn't it kind of weird that these two siblings came out of nowhere and now stand alongside the most powerful people in the world? Why are a couple of Stanford legacy grads telling me I can't shove a couple of macroplastics into the hole of my desiring? Well, Calley and Casey play an important role. After years of Republicans' failure to deliver long-promised healthcare reform,
Republicans have been united in standing up for Obamacare's victims. Remember, repeal and replace, repeal and replace.
Donald Trump has been looking for a message on healthcare, and the Means siblings have the perfect one. This is the Make America Healthy Again movement. Part 1. MAHA's claims. MAHA's claims are simple. The medical, food, and pharma industry is full of corruption. Big corporations profit from our illness and addiction. We live in a private health system that prioritizes money over health outcomes. It's a message that should be relatively obvious to any American with a pulse. But the Means siblings speak with authority on the subject. They claim that their background has given them a front row seat in witnessing the worst of the system. As a lobbyist, Calley says he negotiated back-end deals with the food industry and health organizations.
Working for Coke, I helped steer money to the American...
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, working for Coca-Cola, they actually pay money to the American Diabetes Association.
Casey claims that the medical school curriculum is woefully inadequate and tells that as a med student, she was never taught the fundamental nutritional and metabolic determinants of health.
I learned virtually nothing at Stanford Medical School about the tens of thousands of scientific papers that elucidate these root causes of why American health is plummeting and how environmental factors are causing it.
I guess she should have gone to a real university like PragerU.
Coca-Cola executives, very chummy with left-wing groups.
The Means siblings' origin stories translate well politically, but at the end of the day, Calley and Casey are wellness influencers. Casey writes a popular health newsletter, hosts her own podcast, co-founded a multi-million-dollar health wearables company, and most notably is the best-selling author of the 2024 book, Good Energy. Calley's the second author on the book, with his only other significant piece of writing being a viral tweet about how woke wants kids to eat sugar. But it wasn't always this way. 5 years ago, Casey was running her own functional medicine clinic in Portland, Oregon. Her Instagram looked like any other generic Pacific Northwest vegan millennials. She slowly accrued a health-conscious following, posting pictures of salads, hopping on different health podcasts, and writing articles on nutrition. At some point, she did what most successful wellness influencers end up doing. She became an entrepreneur through her own wellness startup, Levels.
Many of you know that I am the medical advisor for an amazing digital health startup called Levels.
Levels sells continuous glucose monitoring devices to rich people obsessed with living forever. Of course, when it comes to wellness gurus, none of this is particularly scandalous. Casey is just one of a million wellness figures profiting from their upper middle class audience with unnecessary health solutions. So, how did she get tapped for the position of Surgeon General? In January 2021, Casey and Calley's mother received a sudden cancer diagnosis. 13 days later, she died. In grief and disbelief, the siblings decided to turn their mother's unfortunate passing into the representative story of the American medical system.
And Casey and I, on her gravesite, literally hugged each other and said, we want to write a book and we want to make this and evangelize this, inspired by you and others. We want to evangelize this and add the chorus to prevent what's happening, because so many Americans are on this pharmaceutical treadmill, and then the cancer is random. It's not random.
Their message culminated in their book, Good Energy. And here's where Calley and Casey made a bet. Instead of targeting their big anti-establishment vision to the usual health and wellness crowd, they started to target the right. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, and it paid off. Their moment in the spotlight managed to impress one literal brainworm-carrying presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I was blown away by some of the stuff that you were saying and were working on, and how aligned it is with the things that I've been doing over the past, 20 years.
The Means siblings and RFK Jr. formed a natural alliance as fellow anti-establishment figures. But as they formed their partnership, Calley had a vision.
And I had this vision for a year. Actually, it sounds very woo-woo, but I was in a sweat tent with him in Austin at a campaign event 6 months before, and I just had this strong vision of him standing with Trump, and how what RFK represents is actually what Trump represents, and actually what almost every American's feeling, which is this frustration and this rigged thing and this thing that doesn't quite feel right, that you can't quite put your finger on.
So all of these institutions of our democracy have been systematically corrupted by this industry, and that's what the swamp is.
That how RFK talks about health personifies this overall kind of institutional capture.
By God, it's genius. What if the wellness industry doesn't just sell supplements, but a revolution? Did someone order a revolution? Well, you don't always get what you paid for. With RFK Jr. as the current head of the Department of Health and Human Services, he's able to translate MAHA's fiery revolutionary language into dangerous policy, creating the illusion of legitimate politics. He recently canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for critical mRNA vaccine research. Wait, is there evidence that mRNA vaccines are super unsafe or something? No, just vibes. And this is just one case out of billions of dollars worth of life-saving public health projects being cut. It feels impossible to stay updated on all the horrible stuff that's happening in the federal government. And that's by design. They want to overwhelm us. That's why I really appreciate tools like Ground News that help me stay on top of the news without the overstimulation of a social media feed or the bias of a single news outlet. I've been talking about Ground News since 2023, and hell yeah, I'll talk about it again because it's a product that I believe in. Their app and website gathers news from all over the world in one place to show you how different media outlets cover the same story. You also get a visual breakdown of sources' bias, factuality, and who owns them. When the news broke that RFK Jr. canceled funds for mRNA development, Ground News' breakdown of the coverage highlights the different strategies for coordination between media and policymakers. Right-wing outlets do a good job of dittoing RFK Jr.'s policy and trying to make it seem as if his decision was based on super legitimate, scientific, reasonable reasons. The right-wing headlines quote RFK Jr. as saying that they found more risk than benefit or that they reviewed the science. He's not a quack, he's just trusting the science, guys. This isn't a retreat, it's a reset. Meanwhile, articles from the left and center try to push back against the narrative, showing bipartisan backlash from experts, scientists, and organizations against RFK Jr.'s decision. And after filtering sources by very high factuality, the articles made it clear that there is absolutely no scientific basis for RFK Jr.'s decision. Honestly, it's hard to state how helpful this is as someone who writes on current events for a living. The fact that I'm able to take a bird's eye view of the news coverage gives me such a richer understanding of the different interests and strategies in a way that doesn't drive me insane. And it isn't just me saying this. If you don't take my word for it, the Nobel Peace Center even called it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. When it feels like the world around us is quickly falling apart, it's crucial to stay on top of what is actually happening so that we know what steps to take. Ground News makes that process so much less stressful, less overwhelming, and a lot more comprehensive. That's why I recommend trying out Ground News by scanning the QR code or using my link ground.news/Alexander Avila. You can get 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage plan, which is the plan that I personally use. That's full access for only $5 a month. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video.
Let's talk about right-wing populism. Right-wing populism is a tricky little thing. It sounds and feels good, it burrows deep inside you and pulls at latent desires, but it offers nothing. It only pulls. It only feeds. Sometimes you listen to the siblings and you can't help but cheer along.
It's enshrined that there's profit when people are sick.
Yeah.
Systematically, several industries are profiting off of our addiction and illness.
Yeah!
This delusion of short-term gains for yields, for profit.
Yes! And it's like, yes, you're right. Our system is set up to hurt vulnerable people. But pointing out an obvious problem is a cheap way to create the illusion of political analysis. The Make America Healthy Again movement loves to talk about problems. RFK Jr.'s Department of Health and Human Services recently published the MAHA report, a document that I can confidently say is at least 30% human-generated. The first paragraph of the report starts with a talking point that wouldn't feel strange coming out of Bernie Sanders' mouth. Despite outspending peer nations by more than double per capita on healthcare, the United States ranks last in life expectancy among high-income countries and suffers higher rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes.
Despite spending almost twice as much per capita on healthcare as the people of other industrialized nations, our life expectancy is lower.
Calley, Casey, and other MAHA representatives constantly point to this puzzling problem.
But we spend 3 times more per capita on healthcare.
Despite spending 2x on infant and maternal care, we have the highest infant and maternal mortality rate in the entire developed world.
We are spending, in some cases, 10 times more on drugs.
And life expectancy is going down in a country that's spending almost 2x more than any other country in the world. Why is our health getting destroyed the more that we spend?
I wonder what's so different about the US healthcare system that isn't true about every other wealthy nation on the planet. I'm thinking it has something to do with the US being the only wealthy nation on Earth that doesn't have universal health coverage. Oh, so maybe we should start with the question of healthcare access if we want to address healthcare outcomes, right?
We're all trained that policies about getting more people into the healthcare system, how do we create access, This is access to a broken system. I think we're all waking up to this.
Oh, so he's just evil. Got it. Wait, but why does a for-profit healthcare system suck again? Well, let's just do some basic economics. Imagine a free market. In a free market, people freely buy and sell goods and services. You can actually graph out these hypothetical market dynamics on a graph. We got the quantity of some commodity on the x-axis of the graph, and the price of that commodity on the y-axis. Now imagine two curves, supply and demand. You might notice some dynamics here. The higher that one can set the price of a commodity, the more people are going to want to supply it. If I can sell a bag of Doritos for $30 million a pop, then you bet your ass I'm going full-time Dorito. But realistically, no one's going to buy one bag of Doritos for $30 million. I would expect at least 3 bags at that price. So that's where demand comes in. The cheaper shit is, the more people are going to want it. The lower the price of a commodity, the higher the demand for that commodity there is. In ideal conditions, supply and demand meet at some equilibrium that represents the true price of a commodity. Some point where the amount of supply is equal to the amount of demand. Yay, everyone's happy. Or I guess equally miserable. But what if that commodity is healthcare? If I come into a hospital showing signs of fatal Dorito overdose and the hospital charges $30,000 for treatment, I don't really have the choice to say that the price isn't worth the service being provided, because otherwise I'd just die. The demand for healthcare is what we call inelastic. The change in the price of healthcare doesn't really affect the demand for healthcare, at least not as much as you would expect in a functional free market. People are always going to need to not die. This means that healthcare suppliers have a disproportionate amount of power to charge whatever they want, which isn't really a free market, is it? This is part of why a for-profit free market healthcare system actually sucks salty, sweaty balls. The demand for healthcare will always exist, which gives suppliers a lot more power to set the price much higher than people can pay. The profit motive keeps the healthcare industry focused on economic outcomes instead of health outcomes, and as a result, Americans are stuck paying a shitload of money for a mediocre system. Or worse, they just die. That's what makes MAHA's complaints so frustrating. The Means siblings love getting infuriatingly close to the beginning of a reasonable left-wing argument about systemic incentive structures under a for-profit system, but they never finish it.
It's enshrined that there's profit when people are sick.
Come on,
All aspects of modern American society are rigged against the American patient.
But they can only go so far before they retreat into bullshit.
They're actually not able to recommend natural food because there's a component in the USDA nutrition guidelines which takes into account social justice.
Okay, so if, according to them, the root cause of our problems isn't a for-profit private healthcare system, despite it so obviously being the root cause of all of our problems, then why are Americans so much sicker than their peers, huh? Part 2. Doctors hate them. Doctors don't want you to know this one simple trick. Casey and Calley argue that the root of all non-infectious disease lies in metabolic dysfunction.
All of these conditions are caused or driven by the exact same thing, which is metabolic dysfunction, this core foundational issue of how our bodies on the cellular level function, which is driven by our toxic food system and our toxic environment.
If that sounds vague, it's because it is. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. It doesn't tell you what exactly is dysfunctioning, how it should be functioning, and what type of intervention to make. But the Means siblings have actually learned to market this vagueness. They've rebranded it as a holistic root cause approach to illness. And while metabolic syndrome is a real disease, that's not what the Means siblings are talking about. The Means siblings are presenting a simplistic story about metabolism as if it's some revolutionary concept that has somehow eluded mainstream medicine. But not them, right? At the end of the day, Calley and Casey are just here to tell a scary story.
There is a fundamental breaking of our core cellular biology that is caused by our diet and the world we're living in, the modern world we're living in today. It's basically like all of us are a little bit dead while we're alive.
And sure, if metabolism is the bodily system that breaks down food into energy and you're putting a bunch of garbage into your body, things are gonna get a little fucky-wucky. But that doesn't really tell us useful information about how to specifically treat and prevent disease. Like, there isn't just one thing called a metabolism that dysfunctions. A metabolism encompasses a ton of different mechanisms. Different diseases are correlated with different metabolic processes. Your glyoxylate cycle might be hot and sexy, but your pentose phosphate pathway might be screaming for attention. There's also just not enough research on all these specific functions, let alone research on how to treat specific problems with something as multifaceted and contingent as a diet. And the causal direction between disease and metabolism isn't always clear. Like, does mitochondrial dysfunction cause the disease, or does disease cause the mitochondrial dysfunction? This isn't to say that your diet doesn't have a huge effect on your well-being. It absolutely makes a huge difference on every facet of your life, from physical to mental health. But Calley and Casey are pretending that somehow they've discovered the true cure-all miracle approach. But that's not how medicine works. There's never one thing that makes everything perfect and awesome for everyone. Nature's a bitch. The reason Americans don't exercise or eat like shit isn't because nutrition is some hidden esoteric knowledge. Americans are unhealthy because chicken nuggets are delicious, convenient, and affordable enough.
80% of medical schools don't have a single class on nutrition, and yet food is the cause of 9 out of 10 leading causes of death in the United States.
Okay, do Calley and Casey honestly think that the only reason Americans aren't eating healthy is because their doctor isn't telling them to? Well, that's rich coming from the political party who threw a tantrum when doctors told them to wear masks during a global pandemic. Now, the siblings are right to criticize the food industry. The incentive structures we've built around food production really discourage healthy eating.
As smoking rates plummeted, cigarette companies with their big balance sheets strategically bought up food companies. And by 1990, the two largest food companies in the world were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, two cigarette companies. These cigarette companies moved two departments over from the cigarette department to the food department. They moved the scientists. If they moved these addiction specialists to the food department by the thousands, you have the best scientists in the world creating this food to be palatable and to be addictive.
Yeah, all of this is true. Yeah, cigarette companies bought processed food companies.
95% of people on the USDA Nutrition Guidelines for America 2020 and 2025 had a conflict of interest with food companies.
Yes, there are a ton of conflicts of interest in the USDA. And you would think that this might even be the beginning of a powerful argument towards re-examining the profit motive itself.
The food industry isn't trying to kill Americans. They're trying to make food cheap and addictive.
Calley and Casey have this annoying habit of correctly pointing to the fact that a system motivated by profit doesn't prioritize life outcomes.
It's institutionalized to not actually focus on outcomes because the business model of the healthcare system is volume. It's how many patients can you see, not what their outcomes are. We are paid for volume, not outcomes.
But their presentation of the problem is an intelligently crafted illusion built to lead the audience in a certain direction. For example, they often point to the fact that chronic illness is rising in the United States. Here's a passage from the beginning of their book, Good Energy. There is a better way, and it starts with understanding that the biggest lie in healthcare is that the root cause of why we're getting sicker, heavier, more depressed, and more infertile is complicated. This sounds radical until you realize that virtually no animals in the wild suffer from widespread chronic disease. There aren't rampant obesity, heart disease, or type 2 diabetes rates among lions or giraffes. But preventable lifestyle conditions are responsible for 80% of modern human deaths. Now, yes, chronic disease is in large part the result of preventable lifestyle choices. But chronic illness isn't just rising in America, it's rising in all rich countries. Why? Because people in richer countries tend to live longer. The longer you live, the more likely you are to experience diseases of aging like heart disease or cancer. But Calley and Casey love to skirt around this relatively obvious point. Take this other quote from Good Energy. Outdoor cats exposed to harsher environments have significantly less obesity than indoor cats. Okay, but let's think about this for more than 3 seconds. Outdoor cats have a lifespan of 2 to 5 years, while indoor cats have a lifespan of 12 to 18 years. The outdoor cats aren't healthier, they're just dead. But Casey, the author here, isn't trying to do science or medicine, she's selling you an idea. Something about a more natural, wilder life is good for our biology. Is it possible that the comforts of domestication are hurting us? Now, on a personal level, your reaction to this information might be, wow, I guess I'll start eating more vegetables or something. But on a policy level, Casey and Calley aren't calling for free vegetables. If they can craft a narrative that our modern comforts like medicine, social safety nets, education, and housing aren't actually making us healthier, they can then use this narrative to justify federal cuts in the name of wellness. They've made it seem as if they've found the root cause of all illness, but all they've done is tell a cleverly worded story that projects social structural problems onto the individual. They don't want a better system. They don't want any system at all.
The problem with healthcare is not that not enough people are not getting enough drugs and not enough doctors. That's not the problem.
This is what the MAHA movement is really about. Destroying the last chance we have at building a government or healthcare system that might actually work for people.
We actually hear on the news, right, and from our elites, that the answer to our health problems is more access to drugs,
right?
Is more
affordable healthcare.
But like, no.
And they want to replace it with, wait, actually, what do they want? Part 3, A Tale of Two Origin Stories. If we really want to understand what Calley and Casey want, and by extension, what MAHA wants, we have to understand a bit about who they actually are. Well, who they aren't. So I told you one version of Calley and Casey's origin story, and it was a pretty good one, right? A former doctor who just cared so much about health that she decided to single-handedly take on medical corruption. Wow, a former lobbyist spilling the tea on the food industry. They had everything to lose and absolutely nothing to gain. It's perfect. Too perfect. Casey and Calley like to embellish. They may be conservatives, but they certainly have a liberal relationship to truth. Let's start with Calley. According to his Wikipedia, Calley's an American lobbyist for the food and pharma industry.
After seeing inside the system, seeing the corruption of the system, I was a lobbyist early in my career, grew up in DC for food and pharma.
And personally, I find that a bit strange, considering that Calley has never registered as a lobbyist in the United States, which is, required by law. So is he lying, or did he break the law, or I don't know, maybe it's just some kind of high-concept performance art. Another one of Calley's favorite performance pieces is claiming that he consulted for Coca-Cola early in his career.
I watched Coke pay tens of millions of dollars to influence and lobby for Coke to be in schools and hospitals, working for food companies, working for Coke, steering money to institutions of trust, steering money to the NAACP.
Working for Coke, I helped steer money.
While it is true that Coke paid the NAACP hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight against soda taxes in several states, Calley's involvement in all of this, like his lobbying career, is probably bullshit. How do I know this? Well, according to Calley's LinkedIn, he worked for Mercury Public Affairs, where he collaborated with a team of lawyers and management consultants to advise companies facing high-profile public strategy challenges. That sounds like a real job. Vanity Fair investigative reporting reached out to the person who hired him at Mercury, and according to him, Calley was just an executive assistant. He never worked as a lobbyist or consultant at Mercury. In fact, Mercury was fighting in support of the soda tax that Calley claimed to lobby against. After Mercury, Calley worked at a PR firm called Edelman. His fellow Edelmen say that they don't recall Calley ever consulting on food and beverage issues. And in another elegant twist, it turns out Edelman never represented the American Beverage Association or Coca-Cola on the issue that Calley's talking about. They were actually representing Pepsi. So his story is quite literally impossible. At best, it's fan fiction. At worst, a messily crafted lie. The person he worked for at Mercury went as far as to say he is an opportunist, peddling junk science to make millions.
Well, Calley Means was never a lobbyist, ever. And he never worked for Coca-Cola. And the reason I know that is because Calley Means was my assistant.
But Calley loves to present himself as a Coca-Cola whistleblower, even though everything he's saying has been public information for over a decade. That's not how whistleblowing works, Calley. I don't get to call myself a whistleblower for showing this picture of two obvious buddies, but that's essentially what Calley's doing. He isn't some noble lobbying industry defector. He's a former frat boy nepo baby who had a mediocre career in public relations and then parasitically latched onto his wife's wedding dress business until they were acquired by a larger company. And now he's rich and bored and doing this. Calley's interest in public health is, of course, personally motivated. Following his mother's death from cancer, Calley understandably began to research health and wellness. Part of it was his personal investment here, obviously, but another part of it, according to him, was that he suddenly had a lot of time on his hands after he and his wife sold their business. In 2022, he began what he called an unlikely quest to become a health influencer. And to his credit, he produced some really good Instagram reels.
New dad here, first time to the baby food aisle, and I was surprised.
Hey, can you stay still, Calley? Stop! You're covering the ingredients. But somehow, something somewhere worked. And this is the part that I can't wrap my mind around. Maybe it was his viral tweet, maybe it was some connections from his business school days, maybe it was his sister's growing connections from her own business. But Calley suddenly found himself on 2022's most viewed cable news show, Tucker Carlson.
Calley Means is the co-founder of True Medicine and a whistleblower. He joins us tonight.
And this is the connection that would change everything. But let's pause here, because Calley isn't acting alone with the wellness grift now. He has an accomplice, Dr. Casey. Casey was 1 year from finishing her medical residency before deciding to drop out. She says she was disillusioned with the way mainstream medicine approached non-infectious disease. Too much focus on symptoms and individual body parts, and not enough focus on root causes.
You were saying that medical education disconnects the body into its components, but doesn't address it as a connected thing?
We have essentially brainwashed people and doctors to believe that specialization is king, right? What is the most prestigious doctor, right? It's someone who is hyper sub-specialized.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, Casey. You literally chose to specialize in head and neck. What were you expecting, toes? But the thing is, and I know Casey knows this, is that specialist surgeons aren't supposed to focus on preventative care. They're trained to specialize on problems after general interventions don't work. That doesn't mean preventative care doesn't exist, but it's just not everyone's job.
I don't really need my anesthesiologist to know the most antioxidant-rich fruits.
Dietitians, nutritionists, fitness instructors all exist. Those are real professions accepted by the medical institution. Specialists exist for other reasons. This isn't a cover-up or some big secret or even some glaring hole in the medical field. Doctors know that Americans are sick because they eat like shit and doom scroll all day. Everyone knows that. Casey's narrative that no one knows the root cause of illness is an obvious lie. Even Tucker Carlson couldn't believe it at first.
All these organ-specific symptoms that are related to a very simple root cause.
Can I just press you just a tiny bit?
Sure.
I know you hate this.
I know.
Why did you come to that conclusion and none of your colleagues did?
Yeah, because her story isn't true. At least according to everyone who knew her during residency. Her self-professed spiritual awakening story is bogus. Multiple peers who worked with her during her residency say that she left because of burnout and stress, not disillusionment. As one of her peers said, "I did not witness a spiritual awakening. It felt more and more like she was preying on the less educated and using the MD she had to tout these pseudoscience things." The chairman of her department, Dr. Paul Flint, similarly said that she left because the program was too stressful. But maybe she had her revelation in secret, maybe these people are all a part of the deep state, who knows? After dropping out, Casey started a career in functional medicine and wellness guruing. But it seems that it wasn't enough for her. In the last few years, Casey and Calley have rebranded themselves from health influencers to political commentators. Calley's unlikely connection to Tucker eventually landed them a spot on Tucker's podcast. And that, for them, was the turning point. Their appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast would bring them national recognition, but more importantly, it brought them to the attention of RFK Jr. RFK Jr. formed a particularly special relationship to Calley.
Calley had been working on and off for my campaign, advising me on those subjects since the beginning. And those subjects have been my primary focus for the last 20 years.
And while it might feel like a big political figure like RFK Jr. is the one introducing Calley and Casey into the world of governance and policy, Calley's influence on RFK Jr. might be a lot stronger than vice versa.
Calley is arguably the leading advocate for food safety, for soil regeneration, and for ending the chronic disease epidemic.
Calley is the one who had the initial vision of connecting RFK Jr. with Trump.
I just had this strong vision of him standing with Trump.
And Calley used his new line to Republican politics through Tucker Carlson to get RFK Jr. and Trump to connect.
After President Trump narrowly escaped assassination, Calley Means called me on my cell phone. I was then in Las Vegas. I was delighted when Calley told me that day that he had also been advising President Trump. He told me President Trump was anxious to talk to me about chronic disease.
Calley Means is the reason that RFK Jr. is currently the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. The Means siblings somehow wormed their way into the conservative sphere of influence. Somehow. I don't know how. Calley literally came out of nowhere. We saw how shitty his Instagram reels were. Calley, why would you put white text over a mostly white background? There's so much space at the bottom. He had one viral tweet and then suddenly he was on Tucker Carlson? How? Why? Even other Republican anti-vaxxers are suspicious of their rise.
Medical freedom newcomers Calley Casey Means have burst onto the scene, seemingly overnight, are very highly platformed. There are many, many high-profile figures within the medical freedom community who are concerned about this direction in the movement.
So it seems not even their own camp trusts them. Calley and Casey have never been anti-vaxxers in the way that a lot of Trumples and RFK Jr. emphatically are. In 2021, Calley tweeted a meme unequivocally stating that vaccines are necessary and useful. A friend of Casey's, Dr. Robert Lustig, who previously appeared on her podcast and is a literal advisor to her company levels, said that Casey has long held serious problems with RFK Jr.'s stance on vaccines. As her friend states, Casey didn't want to be a part of the administration, in part because she couldn't accede to those views, so what has changed is not clear. But as I've been reading up on Casey and Calley, I've been watching their views change in real time. I've watched Calley passively memory hole himself into a lobbyist.
I was a lobbyist early in my career.
I've watched Casey start to spread vaccine-skeptical rhetoric.
Yeah, I bet that one vaccine probably isn't causing autism. But what about the 20 that they're getting before 18 months? Like,
they are out here openly morphing themselves into political archetypes that they clearly do not actually believe. One of my favorite moments is Calley being interviewed by Semaphore, where the interviewer is talking about government cuts to healthcare.
There's obviously been government-wide cuts.
And Calley starts going on a rant, stringing together a bunch of random conspiratorial words to deflect from the question. You can actually see the moment when he starts to lose his mind.
And this administration is trying to attack the foundational existential chronic disease crisis. Very few articles on that. Breathless coverage of measles. Breathless coverage of these sob stories that are often psyops from the government itself to subvert the Trump administration.
What was that, Calley? The American government is creating a psyop to subvert itself? Do you hear yourself? So why are the siblings here? They're clearly not true believers. They haven't really been public personas for that long. They aren't really saying anything new, so why are they so close to RFK Jr.? How did they become so powerful so quickly? And it doesn't seem to be RFK Jr. pulling the strings here. RFK Jr.'s former presidential running mate, Nicole Shanahan, said that RFK Jr. seemed to be under the influence of outside parties. I was promised that if I supported RFK Jr. in his Senate confirmation, that neither of the siblings would be working under HHS. tests or in an appointment, and that people much more qualified would be. I don't know if RFK very clearly lied to me or what is going on. It has been clear in recent conversations that he is reporting to someone regularly who is controlling his decisions, and it isn't President Trump. With regards to the siblings, there is something very artificial and aggressive about them, almost like they were bred and raised Manchurian assets. I don't think there's any supernatural conspiracy theory here. I think the answer is simple. Casey and Calley have a plan to make a lot of powerful people a lot of money. For the duration of their entire extremely short career as MAHA oracles, Casey and Calley have long decried conflicts of interest as one of the biggest problems with the current medical establishment.
80% of NIH grants have a conflict of interest.
95% of people on the USDA Nutrition Guidelines for America 2020 and 2025 had a conflict of interest with food companies.
And yeah, these conflicts of interest are a problem, of course. But Calley, Casey, let's talk about your conflicts of interest. Part 4, when interests conflict. It's probably an unwritten rule that every, we'll generously call them health skeptical influencer, always has their own product or cure to sell. It's an easy and reliable formula. Set up a problem, offer a solution. Create a need, and become the only person able to fulfill that need. Casey started her influencer career on that path and found a lot of success in it. She started by becoming the face of a problem. Metabolic dysfunction. It's the root of all of your health problems, and somehow all these doctors and medical institutions missed it. Except for Casey, of course. Her plan to monetize this gimmick isn't really out of the ordinary. She sent her followers newsletters pushing various miracle seeds, but at some point it wasn't enough. So she started the company Levels.
Levels exists to crack the code, the secrets that make us.
Levels is a health wearables company that monitors its users' glucose levels. Casey claims that glucose monitoring is key to tracking metabolic function, which itself is key to a healthy lifestyle. She and Calley spend several pages of their book telling you why glucose monitoring is the greatest thing ever. But there's a reason why doctors generally don't recommend that most people monitor their glucose levels. The levels themselves don't tell you much about your overall health. There's no evidence that they provide any meaningful benefit to non-diabetics, and over-monitoring can lead to obsessive behaviors and disordered eating. And that last one is more common than you think. According to Casey, users should avoid glucose spikes of over 30 milligrams per deciliter from pre-meal levels and maintain an overall glucose level of under 115 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. But institutional guidelines show that it's totally normal for spikes to be above those ranges. So users of the Levels app might notice glucose spikes after eating carbs like rice, and that's totally normal.
Rice and quinoa always spike my blood sugar.
But then they might develop an obsessive fear around eating healthy food because Levels told them to.
That's terrifying.
I mean, just look at the foods that are surprisingly dangerous according to Levels glucose monitor. Grapes, oats. Grapes and oats are not going to give you cancer. But according to Casey, if you really want to target metabolic dysfunction, it's not enough to eat well, you need to monitor yourself constantly, forever. So, let's say you take the leap and subscribe to Levels.
The gadget itself starts at $89 a month.
The app is $40 a month, or $199 a year if you're on a budget. Oh, and you're also going to want to tack on a comprehensive blood panel for $299. Well, this is a bit awkward. I mean, wasn't Casey and Calley's whole shtick that the healthcare industry exploits patients through symptom management and neglects root cause treatment?
That's very good for the medical system to have these chronic conditions that need to be managed, just from a pure economic standpoint.
Indefinitely paying $140 a month to track glucose levels sounds a lot like management to me.
But it's okay when Casey does it, right? She's not here to profit in the same way corrupt doctors do. Lamestream healthcare is a $5 trillion industry. Meanwhile, the US wellness industry is only a measly $2 trillion. In comparison, Casey's $300 million company is just a drop in the bucket. She's a middle American millionaire just like you. Casey's really good at the wellness formula. She brilliantly sets up the problem.
The hormones are disrupted because of insulin, which is because of metabolic dysfunction, because of our food.
And she sells the solution.
I started a company called Levels, which consumerizes access to a device called a continuous glucose monitor.
But Casey isn't your typical wellness grifter. She's been nominated to be the Surgeon General of the United States. She's potentially about to become the leading voice on public health. So, isn't it kind of strange that suddenly after Casey befriended the current head of the HHS, RFK Jr., that he started promoting health wearables, like the ones that Casey's company sells?
My vision is that every American is wearing a wearable within 4 years.
Casey wants to rid public health of its conflicts of interest, yet she seems very unconflicted about her own interests here.
We need people creating our food guidelines for America that aren't being paid by the processed food industry.
But when it comes to her personally, well, it's complicated, right?
Conflicts are complicated. Like, I have a newsletter. My newsletter has sponsors. Some of those sponsors are supplement companies. If I were then asked to be on the guidelines committee, people could theoretically say, oh, well, you're really into supplements. And so I do understand how it's messy. And we all create a story for why it's okay.
Calley and Casey have found a way to bridge the gap between wellness grifting and governance. They're not just here to sell you supplements or glucose monitors. They're here to destroy the American healthcare system and turn it into an unregulated wellness marketplace. And that's where Calley's grift comes in.
I think the most important thing we can do today is steer our medical dollars to these root cause metabolic interventions like exercise. We could do that right now with HSAs, FSAs, which is why I started TrueMed.com. Everyone listening should look at your HSA, FSAs. You can go to TrueMed.com, figure out how to spend that money if you qualify on real medicine.
Calley's grift starts with health savings accounts, or HSAs. HSAs are triple tax advantaged accounts that allow people on certain insurance plans to contribute money into them tax-free, grow that investment tax-free, and withdraw money from that account tax-free if you spend your withdrawals on qualifying healthcare costs. It's basically a savings account for medical expenses that you don't have to pay taxes on. However, to obtain an HSA, you need to be on a high deductible insurance plan. It's kind of hard to explain what that is without having to explain the entire American health insurance system, and that would probably send me into psychosis. So let's just say that HSAs tend to be used by wealthy people. Not in any nefarious way, but they just tend to be the ones who are in the position to have an HSA. So supposedly before the age of 65, you're only allowed to use HSA funds on legitimate medical expenses. Stuff like prescriptions, over-the-counter medicine, doctor's visits, bandages, but also related things to health like sunscreen, glasses, and supplements. Now, when it comes to gray area stuff like supplements, you generally need a letter of medical necessity to prove to the IRS that the supplement is actually relevant to a specific medical condition. But Calley had an interesting little idea. What if he could somehow expand the definition of medical expenses to be a little more proactive? Things like gyms, fancy mattresses, red light therapy, saunas, Peloton bikes, cold plunge therapy. So he started a company called TrueMed, which connects HSA-owning buyers with wellness products. Think of TrueMed as the Silk Road of the wellness industry. Wait. But what about that letter of medical necessity? Well, TrueMed has its own doctors. All you have to do is fill out a quick little questionnaire listing out your symptoms, and you can easily receive a letter saying that you absolutely need to buy the Coros Pace 3 GPS sports watch. Please, doctor, please write a note for my Huel. Now, in principle, I don't think there's anything evil about subsidizing something like a gym membership for those who otherwise couldn't afford it. A lot of health insurance plans, including state health insurance plans, subsidize gym memberships because overall it's cheaper for insurance companies to cover healthy people. And that's fine. But TrueMed isn't actually helping expand access at all. TrueMed is marketed as a way for rich people to avoid paying taxes on signifiers of upper-class wellness lifestyle. And in the end, those taxes that would have otherwise gone into Medicaid or Medicare, into subsidizing the healthcare of the poor and elderly, end up getting funneled into Pelotons
and $8,000 saunas. Ooh, it's on sale.
Calley Means is using TrueMed to personally profit from a loophole in the HSA system so that the rich can play with their expensive toys. And this loophole may not even be a particularly good loophole. The IRS straight up said that these are not legitimate medical expenses. Fortunately for Calley, the IRS is underfunded to shit and is now controlled by a friend of a friend, so there's no way they can actually pursue any of these illegitimate expenses. Meanwhile, Calley's framing all of this as some kind of populist crusade against the system.
A literal pharmaceutical lobbyist who was upset with what we were doing tipped off the IRS.
And that's part of the power of Calley's grand vision. Now that he's partnered with RFK Jr. and works at the Department of Health and Human Services as a special employee, he's in a special position to capitalize from the narrative that he's pushing.
Since he's a special government employee, he doesn't have to submit conflict of interest paperwork. Essentially, there's literally no way to hold him accountable.
He's sowing distrust in public health institutions and using that as justification to cut America's health budget to steer it into his company, replacing our entire health infrastructure with wellness products while he makes trillions of dollars as the middleman. This isn't a presumption. He's literally saying that he wants to do this.
The point of our company is to steer medical dollars to flexible. I want to get that $4.5 trillion, Medicare, Medicaid, everything, into a flexible account.
Except, Calley, if I get a broken arm, I can't cure that with a cold plunge. If I get an infectious disease, it's not going away with a sauna. Those trillions of dollars of Medicaid and Medicare spending aren't bullshit. You're messing with the lives of tens of millions of people. 40% of children in the US rely on Medicaid, Calley. What the fuck are they going to do with a red light mask?
The truth is we need to listen to the medical system if you have an acute issue like a life-threatening infection.
Oh, like COVID?
COVID was a metabolic condition. COVID was a foodborne illness.
Oh, we're all going to die, aren't we?
This isn't just a wellness grift anymore. This is the final blow in the long, painful death of publicly funded healthcare in the United States. And Calley isn't the lone opportunist here. He's managed to spearhead a political movement. And while he'd like you to think that he's creating a coalition of health-conscious single moms and the working class chronically ill, he's been gathering together giants of the wellness industry. They've formed a coalition called End Chronic Disease. The coalition is full of exactly who you'd think: CEOs and founders, millionaires and billionaires, those who produce exactly the type of crap that TrueMed sells. The End Chronic Disease Coalition is one of the loudest voices advocating for HSA expansion in the US, more specifically loosening the guidelines on how funds from the accounts can be used. Casey and Calley are two wellness grifters in the perfect position to profit from the destruction of the American healthcare system.
Trump's big beautiful bill included provisions to expand HSA coverage in the US. This directly benefits Calley and his wellness industry friends. It siphons money away from the healthcare system and costs taxpayers billions of dollars in lost revenue, all to benefit a select few.
And where do those billions go? Places like TrueMed, just so the rich can get their Huel tax-free.
And as Surgeon General, I wonder what health interventions Casey might recommend. A useless glucose monitor, perhaps?
It's messy.
And they're presenting themselves as if they're doing something noble, as if they've given up so much to blow the whistle on something we've all known for several decades.
You're giving up the prize, you're giving up the money because you really believe this.
Yes.
And I think I just want to establish that at the outset.
Yeah, they are giving up money. They're giving it to Tucker Carlson to plug levels on his show. So I've been speaking a lot about what Calley, Casey, and other wellness grifters want to do, but how close are they to actually achieving their goals? Well, again, considering that Calley and Casey now literally work in the White House, I'd say pretty damn close. But at the policy level, what has the current administration done so far to make America healthy again? Well, Part 5, Making America Healthy Again. On September 23, 2024, Republican Senator Ron Johnson hosted a roundtable discussion called American Health and Nutrition, a Second Opinion. Discussants included America's leading voices in health, like Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, a Canadian who is a carnivore and who believes in dragons?
Well, how many dragons have you overcome in your life?
Other discussants included bloggers, TV personalities, CEOs, podcasters, and of course, our friends Calley and Casey. Near the end of the roundtable, Calley made an impassioned statement.
To the healthcare staffers slithering behind your bosses, working to impress your future bosses at the pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, the insurance companies, many of them that are in this building, and we are coming for you.
10 weeks later, at 6:45 a.m., in front of Midtown Manhattan's Hilton Hotel, Luigi Mangione shot and killed United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. A few weeks later, Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He was found with a notebook that contained something of a manifesto. In it, he repeats an all-too-familiar figure, a reminder. The US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. How many times have we heard the same figure?
While American life expectancy plummets, we spend 4 times per capita on healthcare.
We have a public health system that does not deliver in times of disaster, yet more money is spent on it than any country anywhere in the world.
We spend 1.5 times more per person on healthcare than any other country.
Despite spending almost twice as much per capita on healthcare as the people of other industrialized nations.
But we aren't any healthier for it.
Our life expectancy is lower and getting worse.
And how many more times are we going to hear it before we actually do something about it? How many more people are going to die the next time it's uttered? Not by vigilantes, but by a system tasked with putting a price on the value of a human life. In these parts, they have come to the conclusion that God, requiring a heaven and a hell, didn't need to plan 2 establishments, but just the one, heaven. It serves the unprosperous, unsuccessful, as hell. On July 4th, 2025, Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The bill cut federal spending on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program by $1.02 trillion. 10.5 million people of the poorest and most vulnerable people in America are at risk of losing their health insurance. And because so many rural clinics depend on Medicaid revenue to operate, the bill will lead to the closure of thousands of rural clinics. Luigi Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in the city of Altoona, Pennsylvania. In the 2024 presidential election, Trump won 62.3% of Altoona's vote. So it's no surprise to hear that Altoona is a post-industrial city full of the very same white working-class voters that constitute Trump's base. And how surprising is it to hear that Trump's big beautiful bill threatens to close dozens of hospitals and clinics near Altoona? How surprising is it that 1 in 5 Altoona residents rely on Medicaid? He's killing his own voters. Trump's public health policy is going to do anything but make America healthy. At literally every policy opportunity, the MAHA movement has made every single problem they claim to care about worse. They say they want to end chronic disease, while the Trump administration cuts funding for chronic disease research at the National Institute of Health.
How you do all of that research and work when you're slashing it and cutting
We're
it.
not. Has NIH funding been slashed?
Yes.
No,
They say they want to encourage nutrition among children.
There's an assault on children's cells because of our food.
Yet the Department of Agriculture cut programs that connected school cafeterias to local fresh produce. Why? They say they want to cut subsidies for commodity crops like corn and soy, which tend to be used for unhealthy and unnutritious processed foods.
They federally subsidize commodity crops, which are turned into processed food.
And yet, the Trump administration extended commodity crop subsidies. And I've not heard even a peep from RFK Jr. or Calley Means or any of these other MAHA freaks about any of this. They don't care. Because obviously this was never about making America healthy. Republicans have always had a problem with healthcare policy. Given their proclivity for evil, they tend to support the further privatization of the healthcare system. This has positioned them as staunch enemies of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare.
Obamacare is a disaster.
And Republicans have promised to repeal and replace the ACA given the chance.
Repeal and replace.
Once Trump was elected in 2016 with a healthy Republican majority in Congress, Republicans finally had that opportunity. And they fumbled it. Why? Because they have no plan. They suck at governing. They have no vision for healthcare in the United States because they want it to be consumed by private industry. But being honest about this is politically unpopular. But with RFK Jr. and the Means siblings, Republicans have found a way to destroy healthcare without having to govern at all. Just have RFK Jr. destroy healthcare from within. Just take a chainsaw to regulatory agencies and funding apparatuses without anyone noticing, and without needing to go through Congress. And Calley and Casey are helping RFK do this.
I think they're going to try to stop us, but I know how to do it. I've worked with Mark Hyman and Calley Means and Casey Means and a lot of other people to figure out how to do it without having to go to Congress.
And meanwhile, the Make America Healthy Again movement is crafting a politically popular narrative on healthcare, focusing on seed oils and red dyes.
And President Trump are walking with the MAHA moms behind them
to distract from the fact that millions of their own voters are going to lose their healthcare. Somehow, they turned the multi-trillion-dollar wellness industry into a populist movement. And honestly, all I have left to say, bravo. Part 6, the spiritual crisis. Well, it's been about 250 years of American capitalism, and things seem to be going great. I hear my Democrat friends tell me what a shame it is that we've politicized medicine and science. How did the vaccine ever become a partisan issue? Why is it right-wing to drink raw milk?
I have some raw milk. Do you want to do a shot of raw milk?
Sure. Why are Republicans getting measles to own the libs? And of course, it's a shame that there's this huge mistrust of public health. But the problem isn't that we've politicized healthcare. The problem is that we were naive enough to think that it could ever be apolitical. Our system gives for-profit medical institutions the authority to manage and regulate life and death. How could that ever not be political? Why would we think that medical and scientific institutions have no responsibility to truly and honestly engage with the public? This is a video that could have ended with criticizing Calley, Casey, RFK Jr., and the MAHA movement for their obvious grift. But I can't just make an entire video criticizing right-wingers for mobilizing populist anger without acknowledging that the underlying anger here is an understandable reaction to the state of our healthcare system. I don't want to pretend like the answer to MAHA is to defend the status quo as if things are totally fine. Calley and Casey are right that there is something wrong with American healthcare, the pharmaceutical industry, and medicine. But the problem isn't that these institutions exist. We need healthcare institutions. But as these institutions currently exist, whose interests do they represent? Whose should they represent? Jordan Peterson is a new player in the MAHA movement. You might remember him as that Canadian carnivore who testified before lawmakers at the MAHA Roundtable in 2024. But Peterson has been in the spotlight since 2016, at first gaining fame for protesting against Canadian Law C-16 for including gender identity as a protected class in Canada. And yeah, as a professional transsexual myself, I definitely think Peterson was wrong on that front. He's been wrong on many fronts and peddles a lot of right-wing nonsense that I firmly disavow. But I bring up Jordan because I think his work represents the other arm of the MAHA project, the spiritual crisis.
We have lost respect for life, which again gets to the spiritual crisis.
Keep going. I love this.
As a leftist, it's easy to be cynical to the point of naivety. It's easy to reduce every social dynamic to greedy, profiteering exploitation, and the world is shitty enough to make this seem like a reasonable insight. Like, yeah, Casey and Calley profit immensely from everything they're pushing. And yes, the wellness industry is full of opportunists taking advantage of a political opening. But this version of the story only gets you so far. This isn't just about self-centered people. If a grand piano fell on Calley and Casey Means, killing them both on impact, that wouldn't end the MAHA movement or fix healthcare. MAHA is the culmination of a deeper and more fundamental crisis in Western scientific knowledge, one that's been building up for over 500 years, but is finally rearing its crusty little head in our algorithms, in our podcasts, and in our discourse. Yes, there is, in some way, a spiritual crisis.
What I think is really, really going on here, which is like a spiritual issue. Like we are like not fighting for life.
My fellow lefties and libtards might respond to this with a scoffing disdain. Spiritual crisis? I might as well be talking about Santa Claus. Relax. We can still be nice and dialectically materialist about this. Consider for a moment why the narrative of spiritual decay resonates with so many Americans. Why do we live in a moment where it is so politically powerful to question scientific knowledge? Well, we have to understand what knowledge is. We've been led to believe in the rubber stamp of science as a meaningful signal of truth, but perhaps this is something we take for granted. And I'm not saying this because I think that science is bad at discovering truths. I think the scientific method is one of humanity's greatest inventions. But science today does a terrible job at defending its truths. We can't just retreat into science as if it has the same blanket authority that it always had. We need to constantly recreate that authority, reimagine it, invite people into it. Michel Foucault is a French postmodern philosopher who provided one of the most important accounts of the relationship between knowledge and power. Jordan Peterson hates Michel Foucault. It's actually kind of funny.
Foucault, in particular, did everything he possibly could with his staggering IQ to figure out every treacherous way possible to undermine the structure that wouldn't accept him in all his peculiarity. And it's no wonder, because there would be no way of making a structure that could possibly function if it was composed of people who were as peculiar, bitter, and resentful as Michel Foucault.
But I think that Peterson, and he's slowly starting to realize this, is actually the most Foucauldian postmodernist of them all. Understanding why is key to understanding what makes MAHA so powerful. So, what did Foucault actually say? Where people usually see power as something you wield like a sword or a fist or a giant badonkadonk, Foucault understood power as an ever-present force. Power is the name of the force that shapes our understanding of the world. It's the force that decides what is true and what isn't, not by proposing its own set of facts, but by laying down the criteria of what even gets to be called a fact. I'll demonstrate what I mean. Let's say that I claim that Justin Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, is secretly the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro. That might sound insane to you, but you know what's insane to me? That this is what Justin's so-called father, Pierre Trudeau, looked like as a young man, and that young Fidel Castro looked like this. Like, come on. But you're not just going to take this at face value, right? You want actual proof. DNA tests, historical timelines, documents. You want what they call the facts. Something like the fact that the Trudeaus were unusually close to Castro, or that 9 months before Justin was born, the Trudeaus disappeared to an unidentified Caribbean island. Those kind of facts. But let's put all of that aside. What if I didn't offer any facts? What if I told you my suspicion was all based on a vibe? And, I mean, come on. But here's the thing. What counts as facts or evidence depends on the conditions of truth that you're working with. And this isn't an attempt to denigrate the idea of truth or to draw an equivalence between fact and vibe. Like, a vibes-based version of reality isn't going to send someone to the moon. But sometimes you do need a vibes-based version of reality. Tell me, what firm empirical evidence do you have to prove the value of motherly love? Do you need a sample of your piss to prove that a piece of art changed your life? No, because not all truths are grounded in a scientific, empirical context.
Pero sí, es una pena tener que explicar lo inexplicable, ¿no? Algo que es más sensorial y en el fondo más sencillo también, ¿no? Lo que da más rabia es cuando intenta intelectualizarse para dotarlo de prestigio, ¿no?
That's not to say that the scientific guidelines for empirical evidence are just arbitrary things, but if we could understand the idea that there exist different types of truth, we might be able to go further and say that perhaps the ways we categorize truth has a historical element to it. Perhaps the border between, say, scientific truth and literary truth hasn't always been as rigid as it is today. Maybe truth is socially constructed? Now, to say that truth is a historical or social construct isn't to deny empirical reality. We know that certain patterns exist. We know that certain causes precede certain effects. We know that the sun is probably going to set tonight and rise tomorrow. But the way we decide to organize our entire society around these empirical patterns, that is a socially determined process. What Foucault does is unpack the social processes behind changes in how we understand the definition of science and the type of truths that science can produce. The conditions for what counts as scientific truth are subject to historical change. Like, what were the social conditions that led to something like homosexuality being labeled as a psychiatric disorder? How did science change to understand identities in different ways? For Foucault, truth isn't one static, transcendent thing to be discovered. He argues that truth is the name given to the common sense that is produced out of a historical set of power relations. Certain institutions are given the authority to decide what counts as legitimate knowledge. This doesn't mean that in one era of history, Smurfs are real, and in another era of history, Smurfs aren't real. It means that the way we understand what it means to be real, what it means to have a knowledge, changes over time. This seems like an abstract idea, but I think we can make it more concrete by going over Jordan Peterson's stupidly wrong opinion about it. Jordan Peterson says that he hates Foucault for his theory of knowledge and power.
Foucault, who I have no respect for, by the way.
He believes that postmodernism is the source of today's most dangerous ideas.
I despise everything they stand for.
But these days, Peterson is kind of starting to sound like a postmodernist. For example, consider this debate that took place between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson last year. The debate exemplifies the problem at the root of all of this, at the root of why MAHA exists, why Peterson defends MAHA, and how the left needs to build an alternative to MAHA. Here, Jordan Peterson sits across from Richard Dawkins, the most famous Reddit atheist of the 21st century. Dawkins isn't just a Reddit atheist, he's the Reddit atheist. He's an anti-theist, a science-fetishizing Darwinian man-whore. He is the embodiment of the Western scientific regime. He fashions himself as the true heir of the Western Enlightenment. Dawkins represents the scientific status quo, the object of right-wing disdain, a prophet on behalf of the Enlightenment scientific project. In the debate, Peterson's position is that there is some truth to biblical texts and general mythical stories. Now, Peterson isn't necessarily saying that he believes that the events of the Bible literally happened, and I honestly don't even think that he believes in the Christian God. But Peterson has a kind of different, more radical idea of truth.
Either it was divinely inspired or it wasn't.
Well, it's the same thing if it's fundamentally reflective of the inaccurately reflective of the implicit logos or order. Scientific enterprise is motivated by the axiomatic presumption that truth tends towards a unity. I think that it's predicated on the notion that there is a logical order that's intrinsic to the cosmos, that that fundamental order is good, that it's intelligible to human beings, and that discovering that order and aligning ourselves with it makes for life more abundant.
Peterson argues that biblical myths, but also like all myths, archetypes, and historical fictions represent powerful cultural forces that structure human reality. So even if the Bible isn't literally true, as in Jesus wasn't literally born of a virgin, it is still nonetheless true that our entire world is structured in a way that reacts to these foundational cultural stories and myths. Most people on earth know who Jesus Christ is. It is indisputable that Christianity, for better or worse, plays a powerful role in shaping Western cultural tropes. These figures unconsciously mediate our entire social reality, and in that way, they are real and true and powerful and out there somewhere. In here somewhere. In the same way that money is a social construct that humans made up, money is still nonetheless real and powerful and a fundamental part of how we structure the world. And here's the thing, this is basically a simpler version of what leftist post-structuralist and or postmodern philosophers like Foucault argue. Peterson acknowledges this.
The postmodern types seem to have stumbled onto something which I actually think is true. And we see the world of facts through something that when described as a story, because we have to prioritize our perceptions, we have to prioritize facts. The idea that we have a story, that we have to organize our perceptions in priority, and that the description of that organization is a story, that's a very revolutionary idea. And I think the postmodernists got that right.
He's right. It is a revolutionary idea. Postmodernism forces us to reflect on how cultural myth structures our society, to investigate what we take for granted about the idea of truth. Postmodernism forces us to confront the fact that nothing is given, everything is contingent, and that all of our institutions are subject to change. That's a revolutionary idea. But Dawkins, our representative of Western science, completely rejects the compelling parts of that claim. He just doesn't care.
The facts that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence going for them. And I'm not that interested in symbols. I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols. Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. It's somewhat secondary to scientific fact.
Peterson sees this impasse, this complete inability to bridge the gap between symbolic and scientific as fundamental to the so-called culture wars.
My sense is that those two pathways have to unify. Now, I don't think we know how to unify them in the West. That's why there is this conflict between the scientific and the religious. It's not like I know how to rectify that.
And in many ways, I agree with Peterson in highlighting this problem. I think postmodern cultural theory is pretty spot on. The Western scientific institution is afraid of the way science, or more broadly, the pursuit of truth, is a politically, socially, and historically constructed process. But I don't think that's anything to be afraid of. Not because I want to delegitimize the idea of truth or say that it's useless or purely subjective, but because any construct of truth that doesn't engage with its own political, social, and historical underpinnings will fail to establish its own legitimacy. A science that is not political, that is not rooted in myth, that is not rooted in ethics, is a science that'll just cease to be. But Dawkins refuses to see that.
Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. It doesn't get me, it doesn't impress me. I mean, I like reality.
Here's the thing. If we don't understand how to culturally and ethically justify science, then how the hell are we going to culturally and ethically justify an idea like checks and balances? How are we going to justify democracy? We can't lose sight of the fact that we continually need to justify and defend and critically improve our institutions. Like, do you know who else believes that conspiracy about Trudeau being Castro's son?
They say he's the son of Fidel Castro, and could be.
Because Trump, like other fascists, operates on a vibe-based version of reality. But vibes are paper thin. They can be created or destroyed on a whim. They can be subject to the charisma of a single person. Vibes are easy to manipulate, and they're extremely powerful. You know what's hard to manipulate? Institutional legitimacy, the popular will, scientific authority. It's not to say that these things can't be corrupted. In fact, the whole political point of postmodernism is to question how these things can be corrupted. But what is undeniable is that manipulating something like an institution requires a shit ton of coordination and effort. Scientific authority doesn't change overnight. It takes work. It requires cooperation, democratic accountability, and a repeatable process. But all of those things are antithetical to fascism. Fascism operates on a currency of vibes. But society can't run on vibes alone. Vibes don't make vaccines. They don't keep the power on or fix the roads. On the other hand, we also can't operate like Richard Dawkins in thinking that pure science justifies itself. No, we need to do the work. But maybe it's already over. Maybe scientific authority is cooked. But that means that what we have to do now is build a new type of authority. A science that is empirical but civically engaged. A science that adheres to a repeatable process, but that's transparent and communicative about that process. A science that values both the authority of expertise and participation of the stakeholders involved in creating the meaning of that expertise. Jordan Peterson thinks that postmodern philosophers believe that hierarchy is unjustified, or that Foucault wishes for an aimless, directionless, utopian society.
The postmodernists were technically correct. There's a near infinite number of ways to perceive and interpret a finite number of phenomena. You can instantly jump to the conclusion or expound the proposition that none of those interpretations should be privileged above any others. Now, that's actually wrong.
That's not what postmodernism or post-structuralism is about. Just because Foucault shows that all knowledge is the product of power relations doesn't mean that he thinks knowledge is inherently cursed. Foucault doesn't think that power is inherently evil. Sometimes, because my position has not been made clear enough, people think I'm a sort of radical anarchist who has an absolute hatred of power. No. And just because something is a social construct doesn't mean it's a fake illusion created by the powerful. As Foucault famously stated, my point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So my position leads not to apathy, but to a hyper and pessimistic activism. I think that the ethico-political choice we have to make every day is to determine which is the main danger. And this misunderstanding leads Peterson to believe that the answer to these chaotic postmodernists is to submit to the order of hierarchical historical archetypes.
Although there is a very large number of potential interpretations of the world, that does not mean that there is an equally large number of viable interpretations of the world.
And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns that lead to absolute bloody devastation.
The fundamental assumptions of Western civilization are valid. How about that?
Jordan Peterson represents a cultural feeling of disillusionment with our existing institutions. The problem with the Jordan Peterson, though, is that he doesn't understand power. He doesn't understand how easily our most fundamental myths, while key to understanding society as it is, don't represent society as it should be. These fundamental stories and archetypes aren't something we should take for granted and accept, but things we need to overcome and reshape. But he also represents a philosophical opening at the heart of the MAHA movement, and maybe even conservatives as a whole. Peterson has done an interesting thing in exposing his right-wing listeners to the process of genuinely reflecting on existing scientific institutions. But just like Casey and Calley Means, Peterson points out a real problem, but doesn't go far enough in addressing it. And I don't think he's ever going to get it, either because he's committed to a mirage of Western greatness that never existed, or because the culture war is very profitable for him.
The entire culture war that's torn the universities apart.
Stop giving your money to woke corporations that hate you.
So we're all disillusioned with existing institutions, huh? Well, what the left wing can offer is a way of overcoming these institutions to fulfill the revolutionary potential that Peterson just can't grasp. But how? Let's listen back on Peterson at the MAHA Roundtable in late 2024.
Generally, it's vital to understand that science itself is an ethical, even a philosophical/religious enterprise. When you're doing statistical analysis, you're making 1,000 micro decisions, every single one of which is ethical. You have to decide which numbers to include and which numbers to exclude, and you have to understand why.
I want to be clear in saying that I think that MAHA is dangerous. I think that if MAHA were to get their way, we're looking at unprecedented damage to our healthcare institutions and the deaths of millions of vulnerable people. Jordan Peterson jumping on the MAHA bandwagon is also dangerous. His speech at this roundtable is dangerous, but he is getting at the main danger. He's critiquing a broken healthcare system, one that has been historically exclusionary, one that operates under for-profit principles, and one that delivers abysmal outcomes. Our for-profit healthcare system is the main danger. MAHA plans to make that danger even worse. And for all the stupidity and destruction that MAHA is responsible for, the only way we can kill MAHA once and for all, the only way out of MAHA, is by going through MAHA. This doesn't mean conceding to MAHA or joining MAHA or condoning MAHA. It means that things are about to get a little dangerous. Part 7. Biopolitics. Biopolitics is a term that Foucault invented to describe a type of power that emerged with the rise of liberal capitalist states in the 18th century. In order to have a functioning capitalist society, you need healthy citizens. And in order to have healthy citizens, you need to regulate life itself. You need to create categories like health. You need to create scientific disciplines like epidemiology and demography. You need to study populations and use state power to control these populations in the name of this new thing called public health. Now, I think that public health saves lives. Biopolitical power isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a dangerous thing. So like, on the one hand, something like a polio vaccine, that's a good thing. It's good that we mandate vaccines and regulate populations so that less kids die. But on the other hand, if the state has the power to regulate the lives of individuals, they can easily abuse that power if they're not regularly held accountable. The state can also choose to not use that power, ensuring that some populations simply die of neglect. If the state has the power to regulate life, it has the power to relegate some forms of life as lower or dirty. That's how you get something like eugenics on a mass scale. So in that sense, biopower is an extremely effective but an extremely dangerous aspect of modernity. Not bad, not good, but dangerous. If, with biopower, life becomes the object of power, this fundamentally changes the terms of social resistance. Gilles Deleuze, a French philosopher and contemporary of Foucault, wrote on the concept of biopolitics by saying, "But when power in this way takes life as its aim or object, then resistance to power already puts itself on the side of life and turns life against power." What's at stake in the battle over medical authority is the question of what it means to live a livable life. When Deleuze argues that life turns against power, he's not talking about life as this biological object. He's not even talking about human life specifically. He's talking about life as this abstract, self-reproductive force that structures the movement of living beings. Think of it in the way that Jordan Peterson talks about God or Jesus.
The concept of God is something like the spirit of hierarchical harmony.
God isn't something you can hold in your hand. Jesus isn't a dude you can kiss on the lips. They are fundamental structuring forces and intensities. For Deleuze, one of those fundamental structuring forces is life, the intensity and creativity that structures the movement of world history. But unlike Peterson, Deleuze wants to detach this life force from the old human archetypes we usually use to understand them. Old archetypes and human social values like virgin purity, masculine domination, limit life's different potentials. Archetypes aren't always authoritarian, but domination is always justified in the name of these old traditions. So let's bring that back to MAHA. Tucker Carlson, Calley Means, and Casey Means are sitting around a table describing America's health failures as a spiritual crisis.
You've got the pill, and it just goes hand in hand with the rise, and this is going to seem a little far out there, but like, it goes rise and rhyme with the hand of industrial agriculture, the spraying of these pesticides, the things that give life in this world, which are women and soil. We have tried to dominate and shut down the cycles. We have lost respect for life, which again gets to the spiritual crisis.
Keep going.
Underlying MAHA is a type of fascist desire. And I'm not talking about fascism as some historical system or a coherent ideology, but fascism as the name of a type of desire that lives within us. MAHA embodies the fascism that makes us love power, that draws us to authority, that compels us to submit. In a world like ours, where meaning is privatized and commodified, where there is no public but only private consumers, we crave stories that bring us cultural unity. The right wing offers this story in the form of a great return, a return to authority, a return to nature. In between Calley and Casey's discussion of health policy, They offer social critiques.
One of the unintentional downsides of the feminist movement is that we somehow made people feel that food preparation was like a less than activity.
And here we can see how easy it is to go from there are toxins in our food to the role of the mother is to secure a future for our beautiful white children.
I don't think there's anything more important we could be doing than creating healthy children who are thinking for themselves, who are eating healthy food. It's a spiritual corruption of our society right now that we have forgotten that this is the most important thing that we can do.
We have a civilizational issue.
We can see how easy it is to spin the most insane narratives because they feel good. They feel orderly.
How wild is it that it's illegal to buy raw milk in this
country? Or
country?
if it's imported from Europe. Anything that we ate, 10,000 years ago that we're evolutionary made to eat.
Calley. Humans are not evolutionarily built to drink the milk of cows because we're not cows.
The foundation of our diet is ingredients that we aren't biologically made to eat, that didn't exist 100 years ago.
You know what else didn't exist 100 years ago? Glucose monitors and red light masks. I mean, obviously this is stupid, but it works because Calley is using the authority of nature to justify their beliefs. And in that sense, MAHA, at the same time that it is pointing out the main danger that is our for-profit healthcare system, MAHA is itself a product of that same main danger. MAHA can pretend to be noble in its critiques of the private healthcare system, but MAHA can only exist as long as that system exists. It is a product of it. It thrives on it. And it's only by actually taking MAHA's claims seriously, the claim that healthcare is broken, that we can finally understand how MAHA represents the same danger it claims to challenge. Yes, it's unfair that our institutions have the power to regulate our lives. Yes, privatization has led to extraordinary suffering and a depletion of our medical institutions. But MAHA doesn't want to do the work in wrestling with the implication of what it truly means to regulate life. They're not here to provide a real critique of biopower. They're here to reinscribe it and sell it as a subscription. They're innovating on biopower, decentralizing it, privatizing it, making it diffuse. They are not critiquing the power that public institutions have over life. They're privatizing that power. They claim to fight in the name of life.
We have lost respect for life.
No, they're just fighting over the power to regulate it. In the name of race, precious space, conditions of life, and the survival of a population that believes itself to be better than its enemy, which it now treats not as the juridical enemy of the old sovereign, but as a toxic or infectious agent, a sort of biological danger. Deleuze, Foucault, and other leftist critical theorists want us to understand that our most fundamental truths, our most fundamental identities and attachments, whatever we believe to be the fundamental authority, whether we think it's our senses, our scientific processes, or our religious institutions, all of these things are not transcendent, but the product of human actions and relationships. Everything we believe to be beyond us is simply us. Just humans doing shit. Humans killing each other, controlling each other, desiring each other, loving each other. But that doesn't mean we aren't a powerful force. Our actions take on a life of their own, so to say, and in a metaphorical way become something beyond us. Life is a force, but a force that is purely immanent, purely material. Life is material, but it's not reducible to the material. It is immanence itself, and so never beyond us, never outside of us, but working through us in a way that pushes us beyond what we've previously been. So what is the beyond? If even our critiques are being hijacked by the most insidious forces, where do we go from here? Part 8. Intuitions, not our institutions. Before the 19th century, color was the domain of the wealthy. To have colorful silks and fabrics was to signal one's social status. Deep blues and purples cost fortunes. But in 1859, a young chemist, William Henry Perkin, accidentally changed all of that. While attempting to chemically produce a malaria medicine, he accidentally synthesized a striking purple color. He called it mauve. Mauve was the world's first synthetic dye, and it caused a revolution in color access. Shortly after being synthesized, the mauve craze spread across the world as social classes suddenly had access to what was once prohibitively expensive. Chemistry had democratized color across the world. It changed the human relationship to color in a fundamental way. Where extracting dye used to be expensive, environmentally intensive, and connected to exploitative supply chains across the world, artificial color changed all of that. It made the world more brilliant, more beautiful, more livable. Today, we view artificialness with suspicion.
Our food now is a science experiment.
Ultra-processed food is a boogeyman. Kids' candy is full of artificial colors, but artificial colors are so maligned that there seems to be an equal amount of kids' candy advertising when it doesn't have artificial dyes. Organic food at this point is a signal of social status. But the modification of food isn't inherently bad or even a particularly new thing. Humans have been selectively breeding their food for thousands of years. Have you seen ancient bananas? Are you eating this shit?
Generally, studies show that diets high in ultra-processed foods encourage overeating. However, ultra-processed foods themselves aren't inherently unhealthy. Plant milk is ultra-processed. Arsenic is all natural.
Ultra-processed foods aren't inherently unhealthy. They just tend to be unhealthy because it's very profitable to process food in a way that is calorie-dense, palatable, and unsatiating. We live in a system that incentivizes the creation of foods that are delicious and addicting, and unhealthy things tend to be delicious and addicting. But the processing itself isn't the problem. Like, water is totally natural and harmless, right? But if I forcefully hold your head underwater for 10 minutes, then water becomes kind of dangerous, probably. Lead is a totally natural metal, but you probably shouldn't eat it. Something can be natural or processed, but that doesn't inherently tell us anything about how safe or healthy it is. There are plenty of ultra-processed foods that can be a part of a healthy lifestyle. Protein powder is ultra-processed. There's no protein powder tree. But it's also a really helpful food item for strength training, which is one of the best things you could do for your health.
The skepticism against food processing prevents us from reaching genuine breakthroughs that would save millions of lives. Do you like it when millions of children die from vitamin A deficiency? Me neither. Golden rice is a genetically modified food created to specifically target vitamin A deficiency in poor countries. Yet, anti-GMO activist groups have successfully advocated for golden rice bans in places like the Philippines. Cool. The suspicion against synthetic food has far-reaching effects. You know that climate change thing that's going to destroy the world? Well, you may or may not be aware that one of the most egregious contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and natural resource depletion is agriculture, specifically the meat and dairy industry. Some propose that the transition to lab-grown meat might help curb these effects significantly. Now, we don't know for sure if cultivated meat is going to be less environmentally intensive than livestock, but there's a good amount of evidence that points in that direction. And if it is the case, it could be genuinely one of the most revolutionary and sustainable agricultural innovations, like, ever. But of course, I forgot, as long as the Republican Party exists, we don't get to have nice things. Several red states have banned lab-grown meat. But why? Well, here's what Governor of Florida Ron DeSantis said in a press release. Today, Florida is fighting back against the global elite's plan to force the world to eat meat grown in a petri dish or bugs to achieve their authoritarian goals. Well, Earth, we had a good run.
It's messy.
MAHA wants you to believe that the solution here is simple, that we just need to return to the authority of the natural order, that our intuitions, not our institutions, know what's best for us when it comes to food.
All you have to do is go back to real food. Intuitive eating is literally the first step.
But like, that's a problem, right? On the one hand, we know that our medical institutions often fail to deliver the outcomes we need, but on the other hand, we can't just rely on our intuitions.
My intuitions are saying that this frog looks frickin' delicious, but it's actually super poisonous, so maybe not.
A healthcare system can't run on intuition. You need institutions. The problem is that institutions need social legitimacy. They need to be trusted, and that requires some sort of mechanism of public accountability that doesn't exist in a private for-profit healthcare system. And America doesn't want to make any strides in that direction. But what would it look like to actually move in that direction? Right-wing populism leaves Democrats in the unfortunate position of feeling obligated to defend the status quo or to defend business as usual, and a lot of liberals would gladly defend the status quo if it means that they're able to get back to brunch. Like, you know those signs that liberals like to put on their lawn that say, "In this house, we believe science is real." And I get it. We want to stand firm against medical misinformation and open bigotry. That's great. But what do you mean science is real? We have to step back for a second. We have to be honest about what science is and what type of claims it can make. The Enlightenment scientific method is really good at predicting outcomes given a set of controlled variables. That's a super powerful approach to the material world. I am so stoked that I don't have polio right now. But while science can produce truths, powerful, practical truths, it can't produce capital T truth. No institution has the authority to produce the truth. I'm not saying this to discredit science. I'm saying this because I want to defend science. If we want science to continue to be able to produce truths, we need a science that understands that it isn't some magical blob that has inherent authority by virtue of being called scientific. We need a science that understands that it is a social institution. Science has its purpose and its specialty, but like all social institutions, it requires social legitimacy. We only get that if science engages with civil society, if scientists communicate with the public, if science is well-funded and generous, if science builds connections with vulnerable stakeholders. Science can't just be a detached voyeuristic observer. It needs to be an active participant in the world. If science sees itself as an institution that creates knowledge, then it has to confront the fact that knowledge is always going to be a politically contested process. And that responsibility goes both ways. Science and medicine by itself can't tell us to care about Medicaid cuts. It can tell us that cutting Medicaid will kill people, but it can't tell us to care. If we want a medical institution that works for everyone, then we need to work for it.
Look, there are plenty of people around who know a lot more about this than I do. Let the experts take care of it.
Power isn't evil, but power has to be justified. It's our job as the public to constantly assess the conditions of power and be active participants in resisting these conditions of power when they become the danger. In a for-profit medical system, this process becomes impossible. We're always going to be suspicious of motivations in a system that cedes power to the profit motive. In a publicly funded system, we would also cede power, but at least we would cede it in a democratic process. And in that way, we're ceding it to ourselves. Now listen, politics isn't free of corruption, but at least political corruption has to answer to the voters. Meanwhile, if a CEO were found to be corrupt, they'd get a salary raise. In a private medical system, there is no democratic outlet. There is no voting people out. There is no protest. You just die. Calley and Casey Means are right to claim that Americans are sick and distressed, but they argue that the root of it all lies in our metabolic dysfunction. They argue that if we can just target this dysfunction, then everything would work out. It sounds easy, right? But whether or not that's even rooted in reality, their framing here actually completely fails to serve the function it claims for itself. Calley and Casey keep telling us this story that we live in a system that incentivizes dysfunction, that profits from this dysfunction, but they never stop and wonder, maybe the problem isn't our metabolism? Maybe a society that so ubiquitously produces dysfunction is itself the dysfunction? But they'd never do this. They want their analysis to start and end with the individual. They want to foreclose the possibility of real systemic reform, of any real popular political movement. They've projected all of our systemic failure onto our goddamn metabolism. During a lecture Jordan Peterson gave on Foucault,
I've read a fair bit of Foucault.
He mentioned the philosopher's book, Madness and Civilization. Foucault's thesis is that the conditions we call mental illness or madness are social constructions. He doesn't mean to say that mental illness isn't real, but that the way these mental conditions manifest and the way that they're understood depend on the social context in which they appear. Peterson's response to this is amusing.
Foucault was the person who famously pronounced that psychiatric diagnostic categories were primarily social in origin rather than biological. And I just found what he was writing obvious. I knew from my clinical training that psychiatric categories have a heavy sociological construction.
But Peterson never takes the argument to its logical end. He never seriously interrogates what it would mean to wrestle with the fact that our mental conditions arise out of social conditions. But I know someone who did. Shortly after the 2008 financial crisis, the leftist theorist Mark Fisher wrote on the increasing rates of mental illness in contemporary Western societies. I want to argue that it is necessary to reframe the growing problem of stress and distress in capitalist societies. Instead of treating it as incumbent on individuals to resolve their own psychological distress, instead, that is, of accepting the vast privatization of stress that has taken place over the last 30 years, we need to ask, how has it become acceptable that so many people, and especially so many young people, are ill? The mental health plague in capitalist societies would suggest that, instead of being the only social system that works, capitalism is inherently dysfunctional, and that the cost of it appearing to work is very high. There's a parallel between Fisher's quote and MAHA's populist discourse, this idea that our conditions are treated but never addressed at the root. When we take MAHA to its philosophical ends, we find a self-exploding concept. They argue that the system incentivizes the destruction of the individual, but instead of targeting these incentive structures, they center the individual further. They center the authority of private institutions that we know can never really be held accountable by the individuals that they're supposed to serve. But now the narrative has been ceded to the right wing. It was only a matter of time before an opportunist, whether it be Calley or Casey or anyone else, used institutional distrust to completely destroy them. But this doesn't have to be the end. I still think that it's possible to critique our current institutions in fundamental ways in the name of reorienting them toward fundamentally different and better ends. We can build a system that works. We can subsidize agriculture for fresh produce, invest in school lunch programs that offer free and healthy meals to kids. We can create more walkable cities. We can increase access to healthcare through a universal healthcare system. All of these things would improve health outcomes so much more than whatever MAHA will ever do. But to do that, we need to start being we. We need a political will, and we need to trust that institutions can work, even if the current ones don't. I'd just like to reiterate what Deleuze wrote on biopower. But when power in this way takes life as its aim or object, then resistance to power already puts itself on the side of life. The forces of a life that is larger, more active, more affirmative, and richer in possibilities. Before we make America healthy again, we have to build an America that lives. Hey guys, the video actually isn't over. It's over when I say it's over. So I'm really lucky to be able to call YouTube my full-time job, but the channel often hangs on by a thread. I'm very transparent about how much I make on Patreon, and even though I'm lucky to make anything at all, it puts me in a tough position as I have to balance using this money to pay my bills, pay rent, and live, but also fund the videos and keep the main channel videos free for everyone. So if you're in a position to support the channel at all, I would really appreciate you helping make these videos possible by contributing on Patreon. The Patreon is full of exclusive content like video essays you can't find on YouTube, and my podcast, Peer Review, where I talk to other creators. I also host live discussions with my patrons, and recently did a live 2-hour lecture on accelerationism, the recording of which is available to watch right now. And just to be TBH and sincere here, the people on my Patreon tend to be some of the most thoughtful, interesting, and critical people in this whole void we call the online political sphere. So, if you've been looking for a left-wing online space that isn't a cesspool of rage, but that's still entertaining and forward-facing and based, the Patreon community and Discord community honestly give me a lot of hope. You can access the Patreon for as little as $2 a month, which is less than the price of a Taco Bell burrito. And what a shame that is, huh? The videos on my YouTube channel are free to watch, but they aren't free to produce. So I'd like to give a huge thanks to everyone currently supporting the channel on Patreon. _WR, Owen K, Six Slugs, A Silly Goose, AE, Aiden Kaczyrski, Aiden DeSandro, Eluri, Alex Cox, Alex French, Alexander Smallwood, Alec B. Clay, Alina A. Pine, Alnara, Amaranta, Annabelle, Andre Alves, Andrea Schreiber, Andrew June, Annika, Ant Avila, Arki, Ari Lord Piru, Ari the Warrior, Armin Ritchie, Arto, Ash Flynn, Ataplease, Adun Elvanis, Avery, Barbecutie, Bartolos Flute, Burek, Beatrice Dahl, Becca B, Benjamin Perry, Bert Spielpenning, Beola, Big Guy Goon, Bitchy, Bobby Jane Disforges, Brandon Uzumaki, Brett Medley, Cat Girls, Captain Mike, Casey, Kaylin S., C. Schaefer, Celeste Irwin, Charles Harrow, Charlie Rose, Chloe, Chris Scalzi, Christopher D., Cliff, Colorful Cast, Corey Clark, Cosmic Spring, Dan, Daniel Torma, Kidney, Daniela de Leon, Danielle McDonald, David Erasmus McDonald, December Vesalius, Deco T, DJ, Don Hopkins, Dorothy Spencer Gale, Dr. Skullduggery, Drainix, Dropout Ninja, Dustin Rubin, Edgar Sayce, Egan Blake, Ellie, Emil, Emma Anastasi, Emmy Murphy, Eric Junahome, Eric J. Moffat, Ermine, Evan Bloom, Eyes of a Tragedy, Fat Kirk, Faye King It, Fickle Happy, 5 Raccoons in a Trench Coat, Florencia Rumpel Rodriguez, Frey, Gabby D'Amico, Gabriela Zurita, Gian Belong, Gibran Essa, Gray Rainier, Griff G, Jim Cap, Heather, host of Craftlit, Heather Frasechild, Henry, Hida, Hog, Hope Jazentuliana, Hunter Mon, I Am Good Enough, ENT Gray, If Being Gay is a Phase, then the moon is definitely a lesbian, Ipsy, Irritated Nick, Jack Beck, Jack Bennett, Jake Vossen, James Earl, Jamin Flood, Jason Wolf, JD Forth, Jenny Tang, Jeremy Winter, Jess, Jesuis, Jessie Spa, Jiminy's Journal, Joe Buerklin, Joey, John Molesky, Joshua Clark, Jackson S. Costello, Joy Palmer, Julie Warner, Julia Herzog, Julia Lavender, Jr., Just Like a Metaphor, Justin Chapman, Justin Nickel, Kara Goolsby, Kelmani, Kenzie Woodbridge, Kiara Williams, Killa Whale, Hertz Kirem, LV Turner, Lady of the Night Vale, Laura Balma, Lauren Walsh, Leash, Liam, Lima Beam, Lynn Shee, Lindana, Lindsay Mercer, Link Play Space, Liz Hirschman, Lizard Lee, Liz Valentine, Logan Lind, Logan Yu, Logjack, Luca, Lucha, Lucid, Loose, M.H. Denigan, Madeline S., Mahala Byrne, Malpertuous, Manway, Marcus Preston, Merixus, Mars Rover, Maya S., Maz Swift, M. Doglover, Megan, Lowndes, Michael Gallisby, Michael McGroarty, Meek, Mingo, Momo Mateo, Mortimer Ambrose, Moth, Misadventure, Muhammad Amory, Mix, Heart, Mysterious Persona, Neomio, Norwerg, Neoparm 2, Nice Morphism, Nick H., Nolan Widmer, Nifan, Omar Apollo's Strongest Soldier, Orankers, Oyster Philosophy, Pat Leon, Patrick Luce, Paul, Penguin with a Tie, Paraspora, Phantom Flavor, Phil E. the They Be, Plato and the Rave, Pleb Notes, Pooja Mudasi, Quack, 777 777 777 777 777 777 777 777 Raiden Roseboro, Raunchy Beeves, Rain B, Reese, Rich, parentheses Ita, Richard Knight, Robot Spock, Robin, Rosemary of the Sea, RSS, Rune PJ, Sadia Shira, Sam Gersel, Samuel Rogers, Sarah S. Max, Scout O'Keefe, Sean Petrick, Serena Steiber, 7 Las Caras. SG, Shemi, Simon, Sophie Huberts, Sophie Morrison, Spinoli, Stolitsilis, Sunshine Type, Super Unsubtle, Swiss Woke, Taika Grubich, Tatiana, Tedney, Teresa Vanos, The Mandalorian, Think Peace Tribe, The Guy Donor, Tim B., Tim Barrett, Timo, Tony Gallagher, Tony Whitson, Toothless Hawkins, Twila27, Tyler Lemieux, Tyler Edwards, Uardito, Umaima Beige, Unproductiveness, Urix123, Valued Customer, Vince, Vincent Hollander, Vivid Disciple, Vivki, Vlad Savranov, Wee Eviler, Wainoa, William Thomas, Yolaine, Yona, Yori, Yortis the Tortoise, Zach Paris.